Do you struggle to manage your negative thoughts and feelings and they tend to lead you towards overwhelm? If that's you, then this video will give you some pointers on how to identify your triggers, to raise your awareness, and how to move forward so that you don't feel so overwhelmed all the time. So first things first, when we get a negative feeling, it is usually a signal to tell us to do something about it. But what many of us do instead is that we try and fight it. We don't want to feel the feeling, so we try and fight the feeling. And that ends up leading us towards anxiety and overwhelm. When we, on the other hand, begin to accept and listen to that feeling, to understand what that signal is actually telling us, then we're more able to begin to assess what direction we need to be making a change in. What most of us tend to do instinctively is that we get swept into these negative feelings and thoughts, so they completely take over us. The frustration grows, we allow it to suck us right in like a tsunami, then comes the storm of emotions that just make everything feel impossible to manage. And we, of course, then feel totally overwhelmed and out of control. So when these moments occur, rather than do what we instinctively do, which is try and fight the feeling, if we are instead to pause, be present, and take a moment to find calm and connect back to our rational mind, then we'll be able to reassess things in a more helpful way. Because when those negative thoughts and feelings take over, what happens is our nervous system is shaken, so our rational mind is overridden. So when instead we begin to pause and reflect before that tsunami of emotion fully drags us in, then we'll be able to be more present and rational in our actions moving forward. Now, I've identified 3 different challenges which are quite common to do with this situation for the purpose of this video. So 3 challenges to focus on. The first is dealing with certain types of people, which can be tricky at times, and that can trigger negative emotions like frustration, anger, feeling drained and exhausted, and that tends to happen either in a personal environment or a working environment, where unfortunately we also don't have much control over who we get to interact with sometimes in a working environment, unfortunately. So that can make it a bit more difficult sometimes too. A second challenge we might face is it's quite easy to feel out of control, right? So particularly when working under company management or an institution, you might not have control over the system. So you might feel like you're completely out of control. And the third challenge you might face is, and this is for the conscientious ones among us, myself included, is we can easily become absorbed into wanting to do everything right, which means that we want to control every situation. We want to control everything, every situation in an environment where there are many factors that are external to ourselves, which are not in our control and will never be in our control. So when we want everything to be right, that is what we call perfectionism. And perfectionism comes from control. Perfectionism in society, interestingly, has led many of us to believe that it's a good thing. So people who label themselves as perfectionists think it's a good thing. But what perfectionism does is it leaves no room for growth. It's restricting. It makes us want control over everything so that our feelings can be controlled, to ensure that everything runs as it should and no unpredictabilities occur. But the fact is, of course, that no matter how great you are at preparing yourself for unpredictable events or failures, the chances are another type of unpredictable event will get thrown at you, which will again make you feel like you've lost control. So perfectionism is this desire to want to be in control all the time, but unpredictable events happen all the time. So there is always going to be something that gets thrown at you that will cause anxiety and overwhelm and frustration. Now, another thing about perfectionism is you might tend to compare yourself to other people, where you're setting yourself unrealistic standards. You compare yourself to all of these people and you want to be good at all of these things just like them, which is totally unrealistic. Even the most successful people mastered one craft at a time. They became good at one thing, and they became really good at it because they focused on that one thing, not on 10 things at the same time. And they didn't compare themselves to others. They felt inspired by people. They felt inspired by their mentors rather than compare. So rather than compare, feel inspired. And rather than focus on 10 things at the same time, focus on mastering that one thing that you're passionate about. For perfectionists, letting go of control means that we are opening ourselves up to being vulnerable. And being vulnerable means sometimes being judged and being criticized. And that can be scary for anyone. No one likes to be judged or criticized. So it's quite a vulnerable position to open yourself up to. And that's why vulnerability is brave. And it takes strength as well as courage, because you're leaving yourself open to being judged and criticized. For the perfectionists among us, our irrational thoughts tell us that it's the be-all and end-all of the situation if we don't do everything perfectly and get it right, just as others want us to. And that if we don't, we'll never be seen the same, that we'll be judged, that we'll be labeled as incompetent or stupid or not good enough. So when it comes to these three factors that I've just mentioned, 1 is dealing with other people, 2 is wanting to control external factors, and 3, perfectionism. When it comes to these 3 points, there are 2 big things that become important. 1 is letting go of control. And 2 is setting boundaries, not only with others, but with yourself, especially for perfectionists. Setting boundaries with yourself as well as other people. With boundaries, yes, of course, they're important to set with other people in order to manage how we are around other people so that we don't end up giving too much of our energy. But we need to have boundaries with ourselves too. What might that look like to you? Here are some examples. What I have done today is good enough. I will stop working on time today because I have given enough of myself. I have done enough. Now, you might want to make up a few of your own. Drop me comments. I'd love to hear what you come up with. What are some boundaries that you can set with yourself? What is some helpful language that you can use with yourself with that? Now, for the recovering codependents among us, our instincts are to overdo and overgive because we feel a sense of satisfaction and emotional relief when we have satisfied other people. So we're trying to satisfy other people, and to get there we overdo or overgive because it gives us a sense of emotional relief in return. And that's why with codependency, boundaries are very difficult to set because we're addicted to this cycle of wanting to receive this sense of emotional relief. So setting boundaries can be very challenging, and that's why a coach can be really helpful if you are recovering from codependency. Now, the other point, letting go of control. Being open to being vulnerable is what's really important here. And with that comes acceptance. I want to encourage you to also reflect on what was the value system that you were brought up with. Was there a balance, for example, between caring for your well-being as well as other life factors or other things in life like education or work? If you are to now give priority to what you value now, which might be, for example, the importance of your well-being and mental health, how would that really look like to you? Because most of us were not trained with this understanding growing up. We weren't trained with it, so we are subconsciously driven in the direction of doing things without prioritizing the things that we actually value today. We might say that we value something, but our actions might not reflect that, and that's because we're very subconsciously driven by beliefs that we have learnt growing up, that are ingrained in us. And that's where pausing and reflecting really helps, to be able to assess, what is the value system I was brought up with? How is that different to what I believe now? And am I really aligned with my values today? In certain cultures especially, if you're anything like the way I was growing up, education came first. It was number one, so much so that everything else came second. When everything else comes second, there is no balance in life, so you don't give as much importance to your well-being and your mental health. In certain cultures, that's very much the case, where education has to come first and work comes first, so we don't give importance to other things, which means that we end up overgiving in one part of our life, but not enough in others. So reflect on what is triggering this behavior for you today, which is leading towards this overwhelm. If you give importance to your well-being now in your value system, but in reality your actions show that you're neglecting it at times for the sake of something else, then question, why is your mind automated towards prioritizing that other thing that you're not, that doesn't reflect your values? Is it, for example, because you're inclined to overgive as a recovering codependent? Or is it because you have adopted these limiting beliefs from growing up, which you might not have realized before because you've been subconsciously driven by it? You've been in an automatic state of mind, in a reactive state where you've not been conscious of it. So those are some examples that you can ask yourself, so that you can start to reflect on uncovering those triggers. Once you've identified the underlying trigger, then you'll be able to start to confront it and adapt it. And that's the only way that you'd be able to break those patterns, is first by understanding what's really going on, uncovering that, and then start to adapt it. And to uncover those things, it's important to pause and be present, so that we can give importance to the sense of reflection, of understanding what is actually going on here. I personally used to be a codependent, and it was most noticeable or most evident in my personal life, so family and relationships. And I noticed it when relationships started to end, and I started realizing, something was not quite right. But it took me longer to realize that I was actually, this behavior was manifesting itself in my working life too, that I was overgiving because I wanted to satisfy other people from what I was giving to them, and wanting to be in control, not being so vulnerable, right? Once I realized this, then I was able to start working through it. Once you realize that your instinct is to overgive, or once you realize that your instinct is to be subconscious, that you're subconsciously driven in the direction of a limiting belief, something that you were taught, that you grew up with, that's not actually aligned with your value system now. Once you realize these things, then you're able to confront them and adapt them so that you can overcome it. This awareness is key. It's really important. Once you've identified those reasons, those triggers, then you'll be able to notice those behaviors too. And in order to notice these things and be able to even begin to reflect on these things, we need to pause whenever we feel that something is starting to go in the direction that we don't really want it to. Not allow ourselves to get sucked in, but instead to take a moment to pause and to be present, so that we can better assess the situation and reflect on it. Why am I behaving this way? Am I really thinking in alignment with my values? in order to enable yourself to move forward. But identifying those underlying triggers is key to breaking those negative patterns, and is key to avoid this sense of overwhelm, so that you don't have to live that way anymore. Okay, I would love to hear your stories, but look, as I always say, these are some tools that I am giving you today so that you can try and work on this a little bit on your own. But like I always say, it is not always possible to do everything on your own. It's okay to reach out for support. And that's what I'm here for. That's what coaches are here for. So please reach out if you need that extra helping hand, if you are going through any experiences such as this one of overwhelm or anything else. I'm always happy and open to chat about it before we get started, okay? So don't suffer alone. Don't suffer in silence. And if your value today is really your well-being and your mental health, then ask yourself, am I really prioritizing that, or am I prioritizing other things? Okay. Get in touch if you need to. I wish you all of the very best. Take care, guys.